Welcome everybody to our February 2021 iteration of our Kickstart Presents webinar series. And today's topic is Where Innovation and Introspection Meet, a guide for managing stress as a startup founder. And this is such an incredible topic for our startups and for everybody out there, particularly right now, living through a pandemic and having so much stress on our shoulders. It's so important to be able to manage stress, and startup founders have a particularly bad situation where you're handling lots of stress from the company, keeping it afloat, working with all your employees in difficult situations whilst living through the pandemic. So such an important topic today. So we're glad that you're joining us. Haley is our admin support specialist that works with Kickstart and also works with the Carolina Angel Network, and she's going to be leading, also helping with the questions today. She put together this wonderful panel and presentation. So thank you for all the hard work, and she'll be introducing the speakers. So Haley, go ahead.
So thanks everyone for joining us. We appreciate it, and we're happy to have you all on the call today. So I'll just start by giving a short introduction to everyone, and then we will go from there. So we're joined today, we're very happy to be joined by Dr. Karen Bluth, who is a mindfulness and self-compassion researcher, teacher, and educator. She has over 40 years of experience as a mindfulness practitioner herself. And she also is a research fellow with the Frankfurter Graham Child Development Institute, where she founded the mindfulness program for families. So we're very glad to be joined by her today. She'll be presenting. We're also joined by Emily Baer, who is the CEO and founder of Growga, which is a mindfulness and yoga startup that has gone through UNC-Chapel Hill recently. We're very happy to have Emily on the call today. And we're also joined by Laura Feiselman, who is the co-founder of Equiti Foods. They're the creators of Good Bowls, and they're working to meet the needs of nutrition and things like that in the community. So we're very happy to have Laura with us today as well. And so briefly, Karen will present, and then we will go into Q&A around 1:30. But before we do that, we're also joined by Velvet Nelson, who's the director of UNC-Chapel Hill, and she's going to give just a brief overview of their cohort program. So Velvet.
Thanks, Haley. Hey everyone, my name is Velvet Nelson. It's a pleasure to speak with you all today. And Haley invited me here to give you all a quick overview of UNC-Chapel Hill if you've not heard about it. Launch was established in 2013 in partnership with the town of Chapel Hill, Orange County, and the University of North Carolina as a way to foster entrepreneurship and economic development in the local area. We're located right off of Franklin Street, and we operate in two ways. We have a co-working space and a startup accelerator that's focused on helping you grow your business ventures. Our mission really is to support entrepreneurs in any way that we possibly can. We want to create a community of support for entrepreneurs and local businesses in Chapel Hill, and we hope that you will find a moment to come visit us or schedule some time with me to learn more about Launch. In particular, one of the things that we do here is operate a startup accelerator 3 times per year. And it's a formal program with a competitive application process where we identify up to 10 companies each cohort that we invite to participate in our program. Companies that participate in that program, like Emily with Growga, have an opportunity to hyper-focus on growing their venture over 12 weeks. We provide you with 2 entrepreneurs in residence to provide coaching and business advice on growing your venture. We work with the Keenan Flagler Business School to provide educational programming focused on growing your venture, including marketing, finding your right business model, and finding financing and funding to grow your venture. And the last thing that we do is we provide a network. So we work here within the local community to find people that can help grow your venture. So we work with the SBTDC, the local chambers of commerce, the SBA, NC IDEA, and several other organizations throughout the community to get you networked into the startup ecosystem so that you can start working on and growing your venture. We are an industry agnostic program, so any company can walk through our door, whether you're a nonprofit, a small business, a retail establishment, or a high growth technology startup. We are not focused on what your business venture does, but just helping you focus on growing that venture. We really are excited about helping and giving back to our community through our programs. We really want to see companies come here, stay here, and grow here. And that is why we focus our services on people like you who are attending these webinars at UNC and have some affiliation with the university in some capacity, or heard about this through one of those channels that's affiliated with the university. I'm always happy to answer questions and would love to connect with anyone. To date, we've served over 160 companies through our programs. We've had several companies get acquired, raise funding, or establish themselves right here on Franklin Street, like Brandwine's Bagels. So I really feel like we have a really unique program offering and would love to have you all consider applying to our fall program. The next program in the fall kicks off in September, and our application period will open in June. So I hope you will consider applying, and please feel free to reach out if you have questions. Thanks, Haley.
Thanks, Velvet. Thanks for joining us. So Karen, without further ado, I think we can turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. And let's see. Can you see the slide, the first slide?
Yep.
Great. Yeah, so I'll be talking today about mindfulness and self-compassion and how these tools can be used to lower stress. But I think before I get started, I'd like to give you an opportunity to settle in and relax a little bit. I'm imagining you probably had a pretty busy morning, lots of running around. And so let's just take a moment to relax. So if you can get into a comfortable position, and if you're comfortable closing your eyes, you can do that. If not, you can keep your eyes open or just have a downward gaze. And bring your attention to your jaw. And see if your jaw feels tight. And see if you can relax your jaw a little bit. And now just take a minute to check in with your shoulders. See if there's some tension in your shoulders or tightness. Let's see if you can soften that area a little bit, your shoulder area. And then shifting to your belly. And see if there's some tension there. And see if you can relax that area a little bit. And maybe you notice other areas that feel a little bit tight. See if you can just take a moment or two just to relax those areas a little bit. Okay. So if your eyes have been closed, you can open your eyes. And we're going to start by talking a little bit about stress. So I imagine as people are starting businesses, starting ventures, that there's a lot of stress involved. A number of years ago, I worked on a curriculum that developed into a pretty large project, and there was a lot of stress. You know, there was a couple of fights over intellectual property rights, and it wasn't fun. It was very stressful. This particular image, just looking at this image, brings up stress for me. I imagine it may bring up stress for you. It's fondly called the blue screen of death by tech people. It means that your computer is about to go through shutdown. So how do we deal with stress, and how can mindfulness and self-compassion help? So often we're balancing so many different things. We're dealing with issues in our home life and our personal life, maybe issues around health, issues around your business. We feel like we're juggling a lot. Mindfulness and self-compassion can be instrumental in working with these different things, all these different aspects of our lives. So what is mindfulness exactly? You may have heard quite a bit about it in the news. It's been around a lot in the last 5 years, 10 years or so. It's actually something that's been around for thousands of years. As Haley mentioned, I've been practicing mindfulness for well over 40 years, but it's really come into the mainstream in the last 10 years or so. And it's defined as paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. And so what we know is that these two components to mindfulness. One is awareness, and the other is acceptance and appreciating our lives and looking at our lives in the moment for what it is, and not trying to necessarily change that. So I'm going to give you some examples of this. Here's one. This comic is, I want to learn to live in the moment, just not this moment, some other moment, like a moment on the beach. You know, and it's amusing, but so often this is what our lives, this is how we deal with our lives. You know, we say, if only. I'd be perfectly happy if only something were a little different. If only I made a little bit more money. If only my home were a little bit bigger. If only I didn't have that long drive to my office. If only I weren't stuck in traffic right now. And the truth is, what we know is that wanting to change things in the moment, and wanting things to be different than they are, is really the cause of a lot of our discontent and a lot of our struggle and a lot of our unhappiness. So this doesn't mean that we can't work against things that are unjust, injustice, social injustice, racism, whatever. What we're talking about here is in the moment when you're stuck and there's nothing you can do, beating yourself up or trying to change things doesn't help. And there's quite a bit of research behind mindfulness at this point. Research on mindfulness started in the 80s, early 80s. And what we know is that there's quite a lot of physical health benefits. You can see some of them here. There's also mental health benefits. We know that there are decreases in things like anxiety, depression, stress, and increases in things like being satisfied with your life and overall optimism, life satisfaction, competence. So how does this actually work? How can we go from this image on the left to the image on the right? You know, there isn't really anything magic to this. There's nothing mystical or magical about it. It's really just about slowing down and noticing and bringing awareness to what's going on in the moment. So a stimulus happens, something maybe irritates you, somebody says something to you, something comes up in your life that is difficult for you, and you have a choice. You can either respond in a habitual way, the way that you accustomed to responding, or you can pause, you can slow down, and you can say, how is it that I really want to respond? And is my habitual way of responding really the best way of responding? Is there a better way? So I really like this quote, between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. So as I was saying, it's about a pause. It's about a slowing down, and really nothing more than that. So I'm going to do a practice with you now, a mindfulness practice. And this practice is called palm of the hand. So if you can take out the palm of your hand and just take a really good look at it. And maybe notice the lines in your hand and the coloration in your hand. Maybe different shades. You might try stretching out your hand tightly and noticing what that does to the lines in your hand and what that feels like. And you might relax your hand, noticing what changes, noticing the difference in how that feels. And then with the index finger of your other hand, just trace around the palm of your hand, keeping the focus of your attention on the tip of your index finger and where it touches the palm of your hand. And just notice what that feels like. You might want to go down your fingers. Notice how that feels on your fingers. And when your mind wanders, just bring your attention back to that place where the tip of your index finger is touching your hand. Okay, well, you can stop now. And you may have noticed, or maybe just reflect on it now, that while you were doing this, and if your attention was actually on the feeling that was being created by doing this, that your mind didn't necessarily go to stressing and worrying so much. And this is how mindfulness works. When we bring our attention to the present moment, as we do through noticing physical sensations like this, we worry less, and our mind doesn't go to the future, or doesn't go to the past. And those are the places where we're stressing. We're worrying about the future, or we're ruminating, or worrying about something in the past that we said or that we did. So when we're able to keep our attention in the present moment, we're able to let go of some of that stress. And that's how it works. It's really that simple. So I'm going to shift a little bit here and talk about self-compassion. Self-compassion is a close cousin to mindfulness. There's mindfulness in self-compassion, and there's self-compassion in mindfulness, but they're distinctly different constructs. And the way that we define self-compassion is that in challenging times, when we're really struggling, treating yourself the way you would treat a good friend. And what we know is that about 80% of us are much kinder to other people than we are to ourselves. If we had more time, I would do an exercise with you where you would be able to see this. This would really play out. But we know that from research that most people by far are much harder on themselves. They treat themselves in a way that they would never, ever treat their good friends. And that this really works to their disadvantage, which we'll see in a minute. The more formal definition of self-compassion is having these three components. So mindfulness, meaning having awareness and keeping perspective when things go wrong, when you're really having a hard time, when you're, for example, when you're having tech issues, big tech issues with your computer. Do you blame yourself? Are you hard on yourself? Or are you, do you say things to yourself like, you know, this is the worst thing in the world. What have I done? What do I do? What did I do to deserve this? Or do you keep some perspective? So mindfulness is having that perspective rather than catastrophizing about the situation. Common humanity is the understanding that whatever we're dealing with, whatever we're experiencing, whatever those emotional feelings are that we're having, are common to all people. And this might seem really obvious to you, but when we're actually in that place, when we're actually struggling, we tend to forget. We tend to think we're the only ones, you know, we're the only ones who are having a difficult time with our boss or our coworkers or our family members. We think, what's wrong with me? We feel isolated. And then the third component to self-compassion is self-kindness. So when these things are happening and when we're feeling really stressed and things aren't going well and we've had a really bad day, are we hard on ourselves? Do we judge ourselves? Are we self-critical? Or do we treat ourselves kindly? And as I said earlier, most of us are pretty hard on ourselves. So I'm going to do a self-compassion practice with you. This is a very short one, and it's called supportive touch. And we do this because we readily, at least pre-pandemic, give others supportive touch. If a friend is having a hard time, we would think nothing of putting our arms around them or giving them a pat on the back, giving them a hug. But we don't do these kinds of things for ourselves, even though we know from research that that kind of physical contact produces what we call feel-good hormones, things like oxytocin and opiates in our body. We readily do it for others, but we don't do it for ourselves. But we can learn to. So we can try out different supportive touch practices, and you can do this either with your eyes open or your eyes closed. Sometimes it's a little bit easier to do it with your eyes closed. You can get more in touch with the actual feeling. But one of them is just putting your hands together like this image. And notice what that feels like when one hand is touching the other hand. And maybe even giving yourself a hand massage. And notice what it feels like when you massage one hand with the other. Maybe crossing your arms and just stroking your upper arms. Or giving yourself a hug. Maybe just putting one hand on your cheek or stroking your cheek. Or cradling both cheeks with your hands, cradling your face with your hands. Or making a fist, putting it over your heart, putting the other hand on top of it. Or even just putting one hand on your heart. A lot of people like this one. A lot of people use it. This is one that I use a lot, actually. So those are just some examples of supportive touch, which is something that we use in a lot of our self-compassion practices. So a little bit of the research on self-compassion. It's very interesting. It's very conclusive. What we know is that people who are higher in self-compassion have lower depression, anxiety, and stress. And this is true for not just adults, but it's also true for teens. And we also know that people who are higher in self-compassion have better overall well-being and better mood, more positive mood and less negative mood. And this is true with the citations here are 2 meta-analyses. So studies that are summaries of many other studies. One of them 20 studies and the other one 65 different studies. So we know this pretty conclusively. Knowing that self-compassion is good for you, a self-compassion program was developed about 10 years ago that's now taught internationally. There are about, I think about 2,000 teachers trained to teach this. It's an 8-week course that meets 2.5 hours a week for 8 weeks. It has a foundation of mindfulness, but the focus is on cultivating self-compassion. As I said, there's quite a bit of research on it at this point. We teach this class at Frank Porter Graham in our program for mindfulness and self-compassion for families. We also teach the teen version of this class, which is called Making Friends with Yourself. And this is a bit shorter. It's 8 weeks long, but it's meets for 1.5 hours. And both these courses are now taught online virtually. There's also a course for young adults called Embracing Your Life, which is 6 weeks long, 1.5 hours a week, taught out of the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion, which is the international program or international organization that runs a lot of the programs and trains the teachers. There are many other programs that have come from or adaptations from mindful self-compassion. There's one for healthcare workers, for example, but I just wanted to introduce these to you. So there's a couple of websites on the bottom. One is our program at FPG, and the other is the main program for the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion. Although there's quite a bit of research on self-compassion out there that's pretty conclusive, as I mentioned, many people have doubts about self-compassion because it's not something that we were raised with. We were raised to be kind to others. We weren't necessarily raised to be kind to ourselves. So it's a little bit countercultural. So whenever we talk about self-compassion, we always talk about some of the misgivings or doubts about self-compassion. So I'm just going to briefly mention these. And if you have other doubts after I go through these, I'd be happy to hear about them, take questions. So the biggest one really is that if I'm kind to myself, it's just going to kill my motivation. I'm going to end up like this guy, deadlines, what, I don't know, nothing. I'm just going to end up like, lying on the couch, watching Netflix and eating chocolate all day long, right? So what we know is that this isn't true because often people who are more self-compassionate don't have the same fear of failure as people who are less self-compassionate. In other words, they're more willing to try new things and put themselves out there because they know that if they fail, they're not going to beat themselves up. So, it isn't really true that people who are more self-compassionate are going to have less motivation. In fact, the opposite is true. So some people feel like, oh, this is like self-pity. The truth is, though, because of the common humanity component, it's different than self-pity. Self-pity is saying, poor me, I'm struggling, I'm all alone. Because of the common humanity component, what self-compassionate people are saying is, I'm struggling, but we all struggle. This is part of life. Life encompasses times when we struggle. So you can see some of the research studies here that show that it is not like self-pity. And some people have this question about whether or not it's self-indulgent. Self-compassion is really like reparenting ourselves. And if you think of a good parent, they're not going to indulge their child in sweets all day long, right? They might give their child some sweets, but they're going to give their child a lot of healthy foods. So this is how we treat ourselves when we're more compassionate to ourselves. We, for example, are more able to stick to diets, reduce smoking. You can see some of the studies there that I'm citing. So we want to bring healthy living to ourselves, and we want to live in a healthy way. So we don't necessarily indulge ourselves. Also, the idea that self-compassion is weak. This also, in a number of research studies, show that this isn't true, but people who are more self-compassionate are actually better able to deal with challenges and things like trauma. And then the last doubt that I'm just going to mention is that self-compassion is a form of making excuses for myself or letting myself off the hook. And also, we know that this isn't true. People who are more self-compassionate are actually more able to admit their mistakes because they know if they made a mistake, it doesn't mean that they're a bad person. It just means they made a mistake. So often when we make mistakes, this reflects on me really poorly. This means that I'm a bad person, or I'm bad in some way. But people who are more self-compassionate are able to just admit their mistakes, forgive themselves more easily, and just move on. So just wanted to give you a couple more websites, and these are some of the books in case you want to learn more. I've shared with her that she can share with you. And I think this is where I'm going to stop sharing. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Karen. That was wonderful, and I appreciate it. So for those of you that are attending the webinar, if you have questions for Karen or Emily or Laura, you're welcome to drop those either in the chat or through the Q&A function, and we'll take those. But I think that we have some questions to get us started. So Karen, I'll start with you, and then Laura and Emily, if you have thoughts on this question, you're welcome to chime in as well. So my first question is, startup founders, particularly those that are academic founders, they typically balance many different responsibilities, both at work and at home. What strategies do you recommend for someone who might be just starting and helping them integrate mindfulness into an already busy schedule?
Yeah, and this is something that we hear a lot because people are busy, and people who come to our classes too struggle with this because people lead very busy lives. Some recommendations are to find a time of day that works for you, and any time, it doesn't matter whether it's in the morning or evening or afternoon, whatever works for you, and start small, so start with 5 minutes, even 3 minutes practice. And it's often helpful to have not just same time of day, but also a same place. It could be your office chair, it could be a place in your home. And just start small but commit to that, 3 minutes a day. This is what I'm going to do. And, I think anybody can afford 3 minutes a day.
Thank you. And Laura, kind of going along that same line of thought, academic founders face their own set of challenges when it comes to stress. What do you think some of those unique challenges are, and what's helped you rise above them?
Yeah, it's a good question. One is that it's not a situation unique to academic founders, but it comes with every academic founder, which is you've got a day job already, your job at the academy, and then you're adding a company to build. And so inevitably you're doing what could easily be 2 full-time jobs or 2 more than full-time jobs at the same time. And so you've got to really sort of put together and put in place all of those effectiveness and productivity tools that we know about. Another thing is sort of being real with ourselves, that eventually going to have to make a decision in terms of what we want to prioritize, our academic role or the company one, and thinking about that early and often and planning accordingly. And then the other thing that comes to mind when thinking about the particular challenges around academic founders and stress is managing conflict of interest together in partnership with the university, which every founder should do and does, and thinking of that as something to manage and to manage well, rather than letting it be too much of a stressor.
Thanks, Laura. So Emily, you've mentioned before that community has played a crucial role in helping you address and manage stress as a startup founder. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you built that community and what value that's added to your work as a CEO and founder?
Yeah, absolutely. So, being a solo founder and not having a partner is challenging, and especially when you're starting something potentially for the first time. You've not started a company before, and so for me, having a community that I could even just know that was there and that existed, even if I didn't always have time to tap into it, just knowing it was there was really important to me. And so when I started my journey as a startup, I sought out that community, and that's where I found Launch, and that was a really wonderful experience for me. And we had actually intentionally set aside time to where we could just talk about struggles that we were having, even personally, professionally, anything, and kind of, knew that this group was going to keep that confidential, and that we were able to so during that time, we were really able to see, gosh, I'm not alone in this, because a lot of times things that I was feeling, even though I felt like I'm the only one that's experiencing it, and just like Karen was mentioning earlier, it's like, as soon as you broaden your perspective a little bit and communicate with other people, you see that you're not alone, and that there are other people that are also going through these stressors and struggles. And so just that in itself, it can make you feel that, okay, now I understand, and I'm not alone in this, and I can get through this. It makes the problem, it minimizes the stressor a little bit, just by knowing that someone else is experiencing it as well.
I can also ask a question for both you, Emily, and Laura. I mean, again, we have some startup founders in the audience, and again, if they're starting to do this for the first time, and obviously Karen mentioned some nice strategies, but again, if they're just starting out and say, I'm going to give this a try because I feel very stressed, right now, there's like a lot of stress around me. What are the things that you recommend that have worked with you in terms of some of these techniques? What are some of those routines that can maybe give it a try that you have worked for you that you recommend using, in those short bursts of time throughout the week?
Yeah. So something that Karen definitely mentioned, and that I have kind of set aside time in the morning. I wake up just a little bit early, and that's when I have time to meditate. And then after my, while I'm brewing my coffee, I just sit down and do a meditation during that time. And then I have my coffee. And while I have my coffee, I take some time and just write out my thoughts, just write it all out, get it all out. It doesn't matter. No one's going to see it. Just write it all out. And then well, after that, and I kind of feel like I fleshed out, and that's like 2 minutes. I'm not saying it's like 20-minute writing practice. It's like 2 minutes. And then, it can be as long as short as you want it to be. And then I just kind of take time to schedule my day out. And that to me, even though it takes time, and sometimes people say, when I schedule my day out, it starts to make me think about it starts stressing me out because I'm thinking about all the things I have to do. But when you are able to kind of section out your like Laura was saying, like, your priorities and be able to see it from a broader perspective, then you're like, okay, now this is what I'm going to get done today. This is maybe not what I'm going to get done today. And being able to set aside what is important and maybe what can be pushed, maybe can be extended up to the next day. And I know it sounds challenging to have a morning routine or to commit to something that's going to take extra time because you already have so much on your plate, but even just taking 10 to 15 minutes out, even just 3 minutes, like Karen said, just something small that you can do and go back to throughout your day. I mean, just today I was feeling kind of scattered. And then I went back to my meditation from this morning where I really focused on like connecting to the earth and rooting down. And as you do that, I was like, oh, okay, now my feet are connected to the ground. I am here. And then it all of a sudden brought me back to that moment. So I would just, like Karen said, if it's in the morning, if it's right before you go to sleep, if it's your lunch, right before you eat your lunch, whatever that 3 minute or 5 or 10 minute time is, start small and then make a routine out of it. Just put it in your calendar, just like you would a meeting,
Laura, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
I just want to second things that both Karen and Emily have said that I find really helpful, and I see be really helpful for others, including the sort of basic self-care and self-compassion things that you mentioned, Karen, of like eating vegetables every day and spending time with people that bring us joy in a present kind of way. And then also exactly what you said, Emily, I do it in the evening as I'm wrapping up my work for the day. I write out all the things I know I got to do. And then I prioritize. These are the top 3 things I'm going to get done tomorrow, no matter what. And that enables me to de-stress in 2 ways. One is that I can sort of settle into the evening with confidence, knowing that I'm prepared for tomorrow. I know what I've got to do and I have a plan to do it. And then also in the morning, I tackle those 3 most important things like first, early, before I open my inbox or anything else, which inevitably, opening your inbox leads to, or at least for me, an explosion of things and emotions, right? I'm excited to see this email. I'm sad to see that other one. I'm frustrated with this person. And so before I get to any of that explosion of emotions, I am confident that I've done the 3 most important things for the day. I identified them the night before. I did them fresh this morning before I did anything else. And that leads to this sort of foundational level for me of, yeah, I'm doing what is most important and I have a plan to do that. And that's connected to something that I would love to throw out, which is this idea of deep work by Cal Newport, which is the idea of focused, undistracted work is the kind of work that moves the ball forward, regardless of your job, especially in starting a company, and giving yourself those focused, undistracted blocks is hugely important. And that's what I think of my morning block as before the inbox. And then really limiting the times when we do shallow work, which is cleaning out the inbox and doing those other kinds of things, keeping those tight and limited.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, what I do a lot of writing, and I have committed myself to a block of time every day in the morning to just write. And it's so true that I mean, you can get pulled away by a million different things. I turn off my email, and otherwise it just doesn't work. You can't be constantly distracted. It just you just don't get the same quality of work done.
Thanks. We have a question from Q&A, and this person writes, "My business brings me so much joy and excitement, but not without loads of overwhelming stress. I think I do a good job of separating my corporate self from my school/social/home self. But sometimes small little things like walking into my apartment and my roommates have piled dirty dishes in the sink sets me off. How do I remain patient and not take my stresses out on others?
Is this for me?
I think it's open to the group, but if you want to get us started, Karen.
Yeah, sure. So welcome to life, right? So this is our challenge. This is precisely our challenge. And yeah, so this is why we practice, this is why we do the practices, because we are human and we can so easily get pulled to those things that just annoy us, that are just like, just those things that just get under our skin, So practicing, doing these practices, doing mindfulness practice, doing self-compassion practice, when we do them formally, meaning taking time, putting time aside to sit down and do the practices, then in the moments of our lives when these things come up, like dirty dishes in the sink, and by the way, I can relate to that. Really, that irritates me too. So when those things come up during the day, we can be mindful, meaning we can say, okay, it's just dirty dishes. It's not the end of the world. It is annoying. It's super annoying, but it isn't. But having that perspective and saying it's, it's not the end of the world. And if you're doing a self-compassion practice, you'd say, people get annoyed. I get annoyed. Everybody gets annoyed. That's the common humanity piece. And then the self-kindness piece is like saying to yourself, this is hard. This is really hard to come home after a long day of work when you're tired and you've been putting in your all day long and come home and see this. This is really hard, and saying the kind of things to yourself that you would say to a good friend. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry you have to deal with this, And it works, it really does work. And you still have to deal with the dirty dishes, they're still there, but you don't get as triggered. And that's why we do the practices.
And Karen, when you're doing this type of things, do you recommend doing them in front of a mirror so people can look at themselves and talk to each other, or you just say it to yourself in inside voice? Yeah. What works most effectively with the people you work with, saying it out loud? I know, Emily was talking about writing things down, and we also talked about, doing some meditation, maybe you all of you can do some examples of what seems to work best with people. You do this, you do download an app and do the meditation. What do you recommend? Yeah,
different things work for people, which is why in our classes we offer an array of different kinds of practices. So there's music meditation, for example, where you a certain way of listening to music. There's walking meditation. There's they're saying things silently to yourself. Of course, there are apps, there are books, there are classes. It just depends on what your mode of learning is that works best for you and what fits into your life. So we teach saying these things silently to yourself, but it's really what, different things work for different people. Some people love some practices and other people hate the same practices. So, it varies.
Yeah, and just to add to the earlier question too, I think just like Karen was mentioning during her presentation, there's so much value in the pause, and taking that moment. And so, you might, and it's not going to happen every time. You might sometimes come in and see the dirty dishes and just lose it. But sometimes if you can just take a second and just pause and recognize, all of those things that Karen was kind of addressing earlier, it's yes, you've had a hard day, all those things. But at the same time, just taking that moment to separate from the experience just a little bit, give us space, just make a little space. Then I think you, even that in that pause, you can say, okay, your response it can be, okay, well, hey, next time, can we, clean out the dishes somehow, or let's put together a schedule of who's going to clean out the dishes when, whatever. So there's so much power in that pause. And then I would say, something that I really like is, there are tons of apps out there, and there's a lot of different resources. Something that I really like is Insight Timer. They have a lot of different, you can pick the time, you can pick guided or just music, or there's a ton. So really, there's a lot of different options depending on what might work best for you. Calm is another great one. Headspace, there's a lot of different resources out there. So just like Karen was mentioning, maybe try a couple different things, see what works best for you. The writing might not be your thing, and that's fine. Or, sitting quietly might not be your thing. So maybe you want to do a walking meditation, or maybe it's just mindfully, like practicing mindfully eating or something, but little small changes in your day-to-day routine can make big transformation happen over time.
Yes. And one more thing that I might add is how important quick and easy conflict resolution over small things like the dishes can be. And there are two tools that I've learned as an adult, like they've been game-changing for me in terms of my own stress that comes from conflict with other people. One is a tool for understanding where and why the other person has done what they've done, or where they've come from and why they've done what they've done. So in this dishes example, I might try to say to the roommate, hey, how was your day? What's been going on with you? And maybe they had something really hard happen, or maybe they had something really exciting happen. They were busy being excited over it and didn't get to the dishes. And then reflecting back to them what they are saying, so that they feel sort of heard and present before I begin sharing whatever I'm going to share. So, example, I'm hearing you say that you ended up, to your surprise, having a big paper from your professor dumped on you today, and that you had to get it in by 5 p.m. That sounds really hard. And I can imagine you probably didn't do a bunch of things on your list today, including the dishes. So the reflective listening. And then the other thing that's been so helpful for me in conflict resolution, which is connected closely for me and maybe most of us to stress management, is framing when I'm upset in terms of I feel blank when blank because blank. I felt upset when I walked in the door and saw the dishes because I had cleaned them this morning when I left and hoped that the sink would still be clean when I got home, or something like that. So rather than telling the other person what they've done wrong, framing the frustration in terms of our own feelings has been helpful for me.
And a related note, because again, both of you working with a startup, whether it's direct employees or others, how do you help your own employees or people surrounding your startup manage the stress as well?
Laura, you want to go first? Okay. I think establishing clear, I think they're going to learn from you, right? So if you're emailing at midnight, they're going to say, oh, do I need to be emailing at midnight? So thinking about, maybe you are emailing at midnight, but maybe schedule it for the next day, so anyway, that's a side note. But I would just say, you're kind of setting the tone for the company. And so if you are, we really have one employee right now. We have a lot of independent contractors, but we have one employee. And with her, I say, I don't want to see you on email on Fridays. Like, take your Fridays. And so, but just being able to be really clear and open with them about what your expectations are, I think really helps. And then letting them know that, what you value. So if you definitely, like, there's sometimes that you have to put in the work, you have to put in the hours, and that you need all hands on deck. And, but just communicating that with them, I think open communication and clear guidelines and clear expectations is really, really important. Unclear is unkind, as Brene Brown says all the time. But so I just always try to think about that.
Yep. And establishing trust, I think, both with people we hire and people we sit side by side with and under is super important. And the things that Emily's talking about are part of that, like being really clear. And also those other tools that I just mentioned in terms of conflict resolution, but establishing foundation of trust, and then also playing to people's strengths, I think are an important piece of stress management on a team. And that, if you sign me up to do something I know I'm not good at, it's going to be more stressful for me than if I sign up for the things that I feel like I excel at, and ditto for others. So on teams, try to really attend to that. What are people's strengths and how can we play to them? And I'm going to actually hop off for another call. It's been, Karen and Emily, lovely to share this space with you. And I'm happy to be a resource for anyone. Feel free to connect with me.
Thanks for joining us, Laura.
Bye.
Judy, I think you had a question that you wanted to pose.
Yes, I have a question for Emily. So since Growga is launching a new platform this spring, we were wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that pivot in your startup. And we'd also like to know how you have managed the stress that comes from pivoting and what has the outcome been?
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, so we are pivoting from we were a plug and play program that focused on children's yoga and mindfulness programming directly into organizations and schools and businesses, where the businesses and organizations were actually our customer too. Now we're pivoting to a subscription-based model, where our instructors are our customer, and that's who we are empowering. So we're working directly with children's yoga and mindfulness instructors to give them tools to keep their classes growing and engaging. And really, over the course of these past few months, obviously COVID brings challenges, but what I've really learned, what I've always tried to remind myself is that challenges bring refinement, right? So it's almost like thinking about fire burning off the impurities to a certain extent, so as these challenges happen, you face them by kind of how do I become better through this? Like, what am I learning through this? And again, it comes back to almost separating yourself out from the experience enough to be able to see, what is it bringing? What is it, what is this challenge actually going to bring and add? So yes, it's super challenging pivoting. And it also comes with a lot of that, going back to what Karen was talking about, self-compassion. I think during COVID, a lot of business owners and entrepreneurs felt like, and I felt this at times, just wanting to quit and being very self-deprecating and feeling like failure. And so, but when you approach yourself like you would a friend, and you speak kindly to yourself, then you're much more able to say, okay, well, I've got this. I think I can work through this. I think there's something on the other side of this that could be even better. And so it kind of changes or reframes your perspective a little bit. So, these mindfulness practices are just can make such difference happen. And so, all that being said, throughout this journey even though there was some times where, yes, I felt really, there was times I felt defeated. There was time. So it's also about just admitting that, right? So I became really okay with just knowing that it's okay to feel all the things. It's okay to feel really frustrated or stressed or down, and because if you don't feel it, you're never going to work through it. Right. So, and then, and just trying to separate yourself a little bit from that emotion and saying, okay, what am I learning from this? And the writing for me really helps with that. And then getting on the other side of it and saying, okay, how am I really going to continue to make an impact? How can I make a larger impact doing something that aligns with the mission, but how do I reframe it so that I'm actually doing the work that I'm setting out to do, which is really just, I want to just get to kids as much as possible. And if I can do that through empowering instructors, then that's the route that I want to go. So that's a little bit about the journey. I mean, there's so much more to it, but that's where we are now. And if anybody ever is thinking about a pivot, I'd be happy to chat with you, because it is a journey, and I have some resources that I really use that help me on that. So feel free to connect.
Thanks so much, Emily, and thanks, Karen, as well. For those of you in the audience, I've just dropped a couple of messages in the chat. The second one has a link to support Karen's work in the mindfulness and self-compassion program for families. There's a link there to donate to the program and help others with a scholarship. So if you feel compelled to do so, you're welcome to donate there. But otherwise, thank you all for joining the call, and very happy to have you all on today. So thanks again.
Thank you.